What if I mess up? She asked. He looked her in the eye and said, they're expecting polish. Give them power instead. Now pause, imagine a world where one sentence, spoken in the right moment, turns humiliation into a movement. At an elite gala, a rich woman sneers at a quiet black waiter and mocks, if you're so smart, translate it. What happens next doesn't just silence her, it sparks something so powerful, it changes lives. You think you know how this story ends. But you don't. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The Crystal Ridge Country Club was exactly the kind of place where people came not just to eat, but to remind others how far above them they were. Silverware that looked like it belonged in a museum, chandeliers trembling with opulence, and menus handwritten in the kind of French that dared you to pronounce anything correctly. The kind of place where power didn't whisper, it flaunted. And tonight, the ballroom glowed with the annual Summit of Women in Global Wealth, a gala attended by investors, CEOs, heirs, and women who had married into dynasties then fought their way out of their husbands' shadows. Among them was Veronica Whitmore, 51, who entered the room with the grace of inherited money and the coldness of someone who'd never had to question her place in the world. Veronica wore a platinum-colored dress that shimmered like it had been spun from currency itself. Her heels clicked across the marble floor like a metronome of superiority. People noticed her, how could they not? She had made a fortune predicting market trends, had a best-selling book called Luxury is the New Legacy, and was the keynote speaker that night. And with her usual entourage of assistants and flattery in tow, Veronica sat at table 1, already perturbed that her imported mineral water wasn't sparkling enough. Meanwhile, backstage in the staff corridor, Marcus Bryant, 43, adjusted his white gloves with a sigh. He'd worked this place for 8 years, watching people like Veronica parade through these halls without ever seeing the people behind the trays. A black man with a sharp memory, a soft voice, and a hidden past steeped in academia, Marcus had long ago accepted that this job paid better than his unfinished PhD ever could. His former life in linguistics, cut short by funding cuts and a messy departmental overhaul, now served only in crossword puzzles and quiet thoughts. Still, there was pride in his movements, dignity in his posture, and something quietly regal in the way he served. Marcus entered the ballroom with a tray of caviar crostinis and began making his way through the guests, nodding politely, smiling when appropriate. When he arrived at table 1, he immediately recognized the energy shift. Veronica had just finished criticizing the pronunciation of a young assistant who had dared to say hors d'oeuvres with a hard H. She reached for the caviar, looked at Marcus with a fleeting glance, then stopped. "Excuse me," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, her eyes narrowing. "Do you even know what this is, or do you just carry it?" The table chuckled. Marcus paused, his expression unreadable. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steady. "It's Russian sturgeon roe, farm-raised, likely from Northern California based on the supplier." Veronica blinked, then tilted her head. "Ha! Interesting. You rehearsed that? Or did someone write it on the back of the napkin for you?" Laughter again, sharp and condescending. Marcus smiled politely. "Just part of the job, ma'am." "Really," she drawled, lifting a card from her handbag. "Then you won't mind playing along. Since you seem so well-versed, can you translate this?" She handed him a gold-edged invitation card written in French, Latin, and German. Her tone oozed smugness. Marcus glanced at the card. The Latin read, asterisk ad astra per aspera. Asterisk the French section offered a quote about the moral responsibilities of wealth. The German part was a quote from Goethe about light and shadow. Simple enough, for someone fluent in all three. He handed the card back without flinching. "To the stars through hardship." The French quote is from Voltaire, "Wealth is a blessing only when shared with purpose." And the German section says, where there is much light, the shadow is deep. The table fell silent. Even Veronica's jaw stilled. He gave a slight bow. Will that be all, ma'am? She blinked, her smile gone. He moved away as if nothing had happened. From a nearby table, someone clapped once. Then another joined in. It wasn't a full ovation, just a few appreciative smacks of palm against palm. But in the sterile, status-obsessed environment of Crystal Ridge, it may as well have been thunder. Back at the kitchen entrance, the maitre d' caught Marcus's arm. What did you just do? Marcus shrugged. Answered a question. No, Marcus. You answered it. Word traveled. Quickly. By dessert, Veronica was no longer holding court. Her guests were quietly discussing the waiter who spoke Goethe. She sipped her wine slowly, clearly unsettled. In the quiet corners of the club, other staff had started whispering about Marcus, too, not in disbelief, but in something closer to pride. But Veronica wasn't finished yet. And neither was Marcus. Veronica wasn't a woman who let public embarrassment slide. That night, long after the shrimp cocktail forks had been cleared and the string quartet had stopped pretending to enjoy Vivaldi, she was on the phone with the club's director. Her voice, sharp as cut crystal, sliced through formalities. I want to know who he is. That waiter. The director, accustomed to smoothing over the egos of wealthy patrons, gave her the standard line about privacy and professionalism. But Veronica wasn't asking. She was demanding. Find out. And I want to know why a linguistics professor is carrying canapés instead of publishing papers. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in the break room eating a lukewarm piece of cake from the event's leftovers. Across from him sat Lucia, a Latina woman in her 20s who'd been bussing tables with him for 2 years. You messed her up, she grinned. She embarrassed herself, he replied. I just read the card. You read it in 3 languages like it was the back of a cereal box. Marcus smiled but didn't gloat. Sometimes silence does more damage than pride expects. Veronica returned to the club 2 days later, not for lunch or a spa appointment, but to speak with the management about cultural awareness training. She framed it as philanthropy, but her questions were anything but charitable. That same afternoon, Marcus was called into the manager's office. He sat opposite a man who had always treated him kindly, but who now looked uneasy. Marcus, this is going to sound strange. A patron asked about your background. Marcus raised an eyebrow. A patron or the patron? The manager sighed. Look, I know it's ridiculous. But this is Crystal Ridge. You know how it is. Yes, Marcus said slowly. I know exactly how it is. I need to ask, were you ever a professor or something? Marcus leaned back. I was a doctoral candidate in comparative linguistics. Taught undergrad French and Latin at Howard. The dissertation fell apart during budget cuts. I took this job for stability. The manager blinked. Why didn't you ever tell us? Because no one ever asked. Later that evening, Veronica received a packet from the club director, meant to appease her curiosity. Inside were printed summaries of Marcus's educational background, public records, resumes from past academic roles, even a citation from a linguistics journal he'd co-authored back in 2006. She stared at the documents in silence. It didn't sit well with her. She had built her life on the assumption that power came from positions, not people. That credentials mattered only when accompanied by prestige. Marcus had neither, but somehow, he had made her feel foolish in front of her peers. She folded the papers slowly and set them down. The next week, she arranged for a private luncheon at the club and made sure Marcus would be assigned to serve her table. But this time, she wasn't bringing mockery. She was bringing something else. And Marcus? He already knew the rules of the game had changed. But he also knew something else. He had nothing to prove. Only the truth to reveal. The following Thursday, a private reservation appeared on the Crystal Ridge service board, Table 4, Salon Magnolia, 1:30 p.m. Party of 1. Veronica Whitmore. The name alone made the prep kitchen pause. The chef scrawled a note in the margin, keep staff minimal. She requested Marcus specifically. Marcus saw his name assigned to the table and didn't flinch. He'd already suspected she'd be back. Power doesn't cower, it plots. He pressed his jacket, adjusted his collar, and walked into Salon Magnolia like he walked into every shift, head high, shoulders square. The private room was a smaller annex, adorned with antique mirrors, blush-colored drapes, and a chandelier that looked like it had never known dust. Veronica sat at the head of a small round table, dressed in cream linen. She wore a cream silk blouse this time, sharp gold earrings, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Bryant," she said as he entered. "How timely." "Always, ma'am," Marcus replied. He laid down her water, sparkling, imported, no ice. Her favorite. She studied him. "Before we begin, I want you to know that I don't typically request individual staff. But I'm a woman who respects precision. And you displayed that." Marcus gave a small nod. "Thank you." She leaned back. "I read about you. Linguistics, Howard, teaching awards. A shame how academia can discard the gifted. Though I must say, it's curious to me, why stay here?" "I provide for my mother," Marcus said plainly. "She has a condition. And this job gives consistency, insurance, routine. Stability is sometimes a luxury people overlook." Veronica took a measured sip of her Perrier. "I see. Very noble. But I'm guessing you didn't bring me in here for nobility," Marcus added, voice calm. She laughed, a light, contained sound. "No. I wanted to understand you. Your impulse to humiliate me." Marcus straightened. "Respectfully, I didn't humiliate you. You asked a question. I answered." She considered this. "Fair point. But there's a certain social etiquette, Mr. Bryant. One doesn't correct someone like me without consequences." Marcus didn't blink. "I didn't correct you. I translated a card. You're the one who turned knowledge into a threat." That struck her. She paused. Then, she shifted. "Well. I admire intelligence. But I admire ambition more. I've been thinking, there's a vacancy on my communications team. Translation, branding, even content strategy. Pays far more than this place, I can assure you. If you're really interested in using that brain of yours." Marcus said nothing for a beat. His heart didn't leap, it measured. Carefully. "I appreciate the offer," he said finally, "but I don't chase elevation offered as an apology." Her smile flattened. He continued. "When you see someone who looks like me, wearing this jacket, carrying plates, you assume. Then you were surprised by fluency, as if intellect and labor can't coexist in a black man." Veronica's gaze hardened just a touch. "Is this a lecture, Mr. Bryant?" "No, ma'am," he said softly. "Just a translation." Silence sat between them like a third party. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down, an investor texted about a contract issue. She didn't reply. Instead, she folded her hands. "You know," she said slowly, "when I was 19, a professor told me I'd never succeed unless I softened my tone. I proved him wrong. Ruthlessly. Maybe I underestimated you because I saw that same defiance. But untampered." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Defiance? Or confidence?" Veronica nodded. "Perhaps both." She stood abruptly. "Well. I suppose I'll eat elsewhere today." Marcus, without missing a beat, stepped aside to allow her to exit. "Have a good afternoon, ma'am." As she walked past him, she paused, just briefly. If you change your mind, Mr. Bryant, not everyone gets a second invitation. Then she was gone, heels clicking against the floor like punctuation. Back in the hallway, Marcus exhaled slowly. Lucia waited outside the kitchen, eyebrows raised. She tried to hire you, didn't she? Marcus gave a small smile. She tried to fix her image. But she forgot, some of us don't trade dignity for dollars. Lucia shook her head. Man. You're gonna end up running this place. No, he said. I've got something better in mind. That night, Marcus pulled out an old manila folder from his closet. Inside were research notes, lesson plans, even the half-drafted introduction to the dissertation he'd once abandoned. A phrase he had scribbled years ago in the corner of one page stared back at him: language is not class, it is capacity. He circled it in fresh ink. He was done being the silent genius in the background. It was time to speak, in more ways than one. Marcus sat at the tiny kitchen table in his apartment that night, old papers spread out before him like a forgotten map waiting to be followed again. He hadn't opened the folder in years. The edges were curled, the pages worn, some smudged from time and disinterest. But his handwriting was still crisp. Sharp. Controlled. He had once written every word with conviction. Back when he believed academia would make room for someone like him, not just as a token, but as a voice. He stared at the opening line of his abandoned dissertation: linguistic perception is not merely about what is said, but about who is allowed to say it. He whispered it aloud. It still hit like a drum. The next morning, Marcus requested the evening off. He told the maitre d' he had some personal business. The man, startled, approved it instantly. Marcus never asked for time off. By 6 p.m., Marcus was seated at the Howard University Library. The same corner desk where he used to grade papers. He had called in a favor to gain access, and the security guard still remembered him. Dr. Elkins, his former mentor, shuffled in half an hour later. White-haired now, still wrapped in bow ties and worn elbow-patched jackets. Marcus Bryant, the older man said, squinting. "Son, you're a ghost." Marcus smiled. "Just a tired one." They sat, and he laid it all out. His manuscript. His unfinished thesis. His regrets. Elkins listened carefully. "You were the sharpest Latinist we had in 15 years. You had something different. Clarity." Marcus looked down. "And I left. I didn't fight." "No, you survived. There's a difference. You think everyone who stays in the academy wins? Most just adapt to losing slower." The old man chuckled bitterly. "But if you're asking whether you still have something to say, yes. God, yes. The world needs your voice." For the first time in years, Marcus believed it. That weekend, he began drafting a TED-style lecture proposal: the power of perception, language, labor, and the myth of intelligence. It wasn't for tenure. It wasn't for validation. It was for everyone like him who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. Meanwhile, Veronica Whitmore stood in the foyer of her Manhattan office suite, reviewing a press kit for an upcoming European speaking tour. The headlines about her were still golden: Veronica Whitmore, the matriarch of markets. But she hadn't been able to shake the memory of Marcus's calm defiance. She thought about how confident he'd been when rejecting her. Not bitter. Not boastful. Just, complete. It gnawed at her. In her world, people grovel for opportunity. They dress like success and speak in boardroom euphemisms, trying to climb. Marcus didn't climb. He stood still and made her come to him. A week later, one of her aides came in carrying an iPad. "You might want to see this." The screen displayed a viral clip from a local community summit held in D.C. Marcus stood at a podium, calmly addressing a crowd. "Many people believe intelligence sounds a certain way. That it wears a suit, speaks softly, maybe even looks like money. But that's a lie we've been sold. Intelligence is inquiry. Precision. Curiosity. And sometimes, intelligence serves tables while paying medical bills. The room was silent, then erupted into applause. Veronica blinked. The video had over 400,000 views in 2 days. She scrolled through the comments. One caught her eye: "He used to serve my table. Now he serves truth." Hashtag Marcus Bryant ***. Another: "Never judge a man by his uniform. He might teach you something in Latin." Suddenly, her brand of sophistication felt hollow. Her curated wit, her perfectly rehearsed speeches, none of it moved people like this waiter's sincerity did. And then she noticed something worse. Another speaker at her Zurich event had dropped out. The replacement? A newly invited voice. Dr. Marcus Bryant, independent scholar, linguist, cultural analyst. She read the name twice. Her PR assistant entered the room. "Veronica. Zurich committee wants your feedback on the updated panelist list." Veronica didn't respond right away. She looked out the window, the Manhattan skyline glittering before her, and for the first time in years, she felt outmaneuvered, not in business, but in grace. Back at Crystal Ridge, Marcus handed in his notice. The maitre d' looked stunned. "You sure, Marcus? You're a legend in this place." Marcus smiled, folded the apron one last time. "Legends don't belong in shadows forever." Lucia hugged him tightly. "What are you gonna do?" He grinned. "Speak." As he left through the employee entrance, his head high, jacket folded neatly over one arm, someone held the door for him. It was the club's pianist. "Heard about Zurich. Don't forget us little people." Marcus winked. "There are no little people. Just big stories waiting to be told." The flight to Zurich was long, but Marcus didn't mind. He spent most of it reviewing his notes, not for memorization. He didn't need a script, but for clarity. This was his first major international speaking event, but he felt no nerves. Not because he underestimated the moment, but because the moment didn't define him. His clarity, his message, his presence, those were already earned. The invitation had come through an academic organizer who'd seen the viral clip. They were curating a panel titled "Communication, Identity, and the Global Future," and someone had thought Marcus's voice, raw, real, unpolished by corporate grooming, might bring needed contrast. The venue was high up in the Swiss hills, in a minimalist glass building that overlooked a lake so still it reflected the sky perfectly. Inside, a different kind of reflection was unfolding. Name tags, sharp suits, rehearsed elevator pitches, all clinking glasses, and curated small talk. The event hummed with polite elitism. Marcus arrived in a navy suit, not flashy, not loud, but clean and confident. No tie. Just clarity in his posture. He scanned the program booklet. There, in bold print, Panel 3, Language as Identity and Power Speakers *, Veronica Whitmore, financial strategist and global speaker, Dr. Michaela Lenz, professor of sociolinguistics, Marcus Bryant, independent linguist and cultural analyst. Veronica. Of course. Marcus couldn't help but smile. They'd meet again, but this time, not as server and guest. As equals, at least by event billing. The panel opened with Michaela Lenz, a German academic who laid out frameworks and diagrams about sociolinguistic shifts in post-industrial economies. She was sharp, articulate, and methodical, every word placed with purpose. Then came Veronica. She stood with the ease of someone used to adoration, delivering polished thoughts on how communication affects global investing. She spoke of semantic currencies and verbal capital, terms so clinical they sounded sterilized. Then the moderator introduced Marcus. He didn't stand behind the podium. He walked around it. "No slides," he said gently. "No charts. Just a story." The room quieted. Dozens of high-status minds leaned in. "I used to serve tables in a country club," Marcus began. People looked at me and assumed I knew nothing. One day, someone handed me a card written in French, German, and Latin. They asked me to translate it, expecting failure. I translated it fully. Fluently. Because my worth isn't in what I wear or what I earn. It's in what I've learned, and how I use it. He paused, let that breathe. We are living in a time where language still decides power. Accents get judged. Dialects dismissed. And whole cultures are treated as unprofessional because their syntax doesn't match the so-called standard. Heads nodded now. He continued, but fluency is more than vocabulary. It's the ability to carry dignity in hostile spaces. To remain whole when people try to shrink you. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Not noise, reverence. Intelligence doesn't always wear a lanyard or have a title. Sometimes it carries a tray. He finished with a nod. The applause started modestly. Then grew. Then stood. A standing ovation in Zurich. And Veronica? She clapped too, but slowly, lips tight. Her expression was unreadable. But her eyes? They said everything. After the panel, there was a reception. Wine, soft cheese, quiet jazz. Marcus stood near the back, sipping water. He preferred distance in crowds like this, not out of fear, but out of preservation. Veronica approached. Alone. Well, she said, lifting her glass faintly. You found your audience. No, Marcus replied evenly. They found me. She tilted her head. You didn't accept my offer. But it seems you didn't need it. I needed belief, Marcus said. And purpose. You offered a position. That's not the same thing. Veronica stared at him, no smugness this time. Just stillness. I underestimated you. He gave a small nod. You're not the first. No, she agreed. But I won't be the last, either. She turned to walk away, then stopped. Your voice, she said over her shoulder, it carries further than you think. Just make sure it doesn't echo alone. And then she was gone. By the time Marcus returned to the US, the footage of the panel had already begun circulating. The organizers released his clip as the highlight. It caught fire again. He received interview requests from podcasts, universities, and nonprofit groups. But one message stood out, an offer to publish his original dissertation with a new foreword, as a social commentary on language and labor. He emailed back one word, yes. Then, he closed his laptop and looked out the window of his modest apartment. Same view. Same couch. But everything had shifted. He was no longer the man behind the tray. He was the man telling the story behind it. 2 months after Zurich, Marcus stood backstage at Howard University's annual fall convocation. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, faculty in regalia, students in jeans and dreams, families holding up phones. Marcus wasn't a student anymore, nor a staff. He had been invited as a guest speaker. His lecture from Zurich had made its rounds in academic circles, and the dean had extended an invitation with both pride and a little sheepishness for how the institution once let him slip away. As the opening speaker introduced him, Marcus adjusted the lapel of his navy jacket. Not a suit this time. Just comfortable, tailored enough to say he belonged. He stepped into the lights. 10 years ago, he began, I left Howard quietly. I was not failed by knowledge, but by a system that measures potential by politics and money. I worked nights, lost grants, and eventually traded chalkboards for banquet trays. Some called it a fall. I call it a perspective shift. A few heads nodded. A few more froze, hearing truth. But here's what I learned at the tables I served: respect isn't granted because of degrees. It's felt in how you speak, how you listen. The dignity of work, any work, doesn't vanish because people ignore it. It just waits to be reclaimed. Thunderous applause followed. Not because of fanfare, but because he was theirs. A returning voice with the scars and clarity that couldn't be taught in a lecture hall. Meanwhile, in New York, Veronica Whitmore was also on stage, at a high-stakes investor summit in the financial district. But the crowd wasn't leaning in like they used to. Something had changed. Her metaphors, once regarded as genius, now felt contrived. Her language polished but sterile. The comparison between wealth and speech currency didn't land the same. Later that evening, her assistant approached during the post-event dinner. "You were fine," the assistant said, gently. "But, they keep bringing up that linguist guy." The waiter. Marcus Bryant. Said his name came up at 2 panels today. Veronica stirred her wine slowly. "He's not a waiter anymore." "No," the assistant said. "He's a movement." She didn't reply. Just stared at her untouched plate. Back in D.C., Marcus finished his talk, but didn't linger in the limelight. He walked the halls of Howard alone for a while after, taking in the space. He stopped in front of the old linguistics wing and found the office door still bearing Elkins's name. Inside, the old professor looked up with delight. "So, you're famous now." Temporarily, Marcus smiled. They sat for a while, drinking stale coffee, swapping stories. Then Elkins handed him a thick envelope. "From the publishing house," he said. "Your book proves. They're calling it Beyond the Accent, Language and the Illusion of Status." Marcus traced the title with his finger. "It's real now." "It always was," Elkins replied. "The world's just finally listening." That weekend, Marcus held a community lecture in Southeast D.C. Not a glamorous crowd, students, custodians, baristas, retirees. He spoke without a microphone, seated on a stool. He told stories. About the card Veronica had handed him. About the languages he knew. About the ones people never bothered to ask him about, like Avi, Creole, Gullah, the tongues of the overlooked. Halfway through, a boy raised his hand. "So wait. You were a professor, then a waiter, then a professor again?" "No," Marcus said. "I've always been a professor. Even when I was carrying plates." The room fell silent. A man in the back stood up, older, working class by the look of his hands. "Have you ever thought about running a program? Teaching others like us? Not just language, but how to use it like you do?" Marcus paused. "I have." "Then do it," the man said. "We'll come." That night, Marcus opened a new document on his laptop, the Bryant Institute for Applied Language and Equity, a workshop-based program focused on teaching underrepresented communities the power of communication across jobs, interviews, courtrooms, and everyday life. Not just how to speak, but how to be heard. Within 2 weeks, he secured local nonprofit backing. The community center space. Volunteers. A retired interpreter from the UN. A drama coach from Baltimore. Even Lucia from Crystal Ridge offered to manage intake. Word spread fast. And then one day, an envelope arrived with Veronica Whitmore's letterhead. Marcus opened it cautiously. Inside, a short note. "Language belongs to the bold. I was once wrong. Now, I'm listening." Attached was a donation, sizable. No strings. No naming rights. Just acknowledgement. Marcus nodded once and filed the note away. Not as a trophy. As a translation. For what growth actually sounds like. The Bryant Institute officially opened its doors on a crisp Monday morning, housed in a former high school annex repurposed into a vibrant community learning space. The exterior was modest, no grand marble entryway, no banners, just a hand-painted sign above the door reading, "Say it with power." Marcus insisted on that motto. It wasn't about articulation. It was about intention. Inside, the rooms were humming. The chairs were mismatched. Tables held stacks of notebooks, water bottles, language charts, and mirrors for pronunciation exercises. But the energy? The energy was electric. There were no uniforms. No GPA requirements. No one was asked for a resume. The first cohort ranged from a 60-year-old janitor who wanted to better advocate for his pension rights to a young cashier hoping to master job interview language. One woman had fled corporate life after being told she sounded too urban in meetings. Another man, a formerly incarcerated father, said he was tired of people interpreting his silence as ignorance. They came because Marcus didn't offer lessons. He offered a voice. Marcus led every session himself at first. He opened with this: "I'm not here to fix the way you speak. I'm here to show you how power hides in pronunciation, posture, and perception, and how to take that power back." He taught the science of code switching, but refused to glorify it. He taught standard grammar, but also pushed students to challenge why standard exists in the first place. He blended Shakespeare with hip-hop, Latin phrases with street slang, courtroom rhetoric with barber-shop brilliance. Every week, new people signed up. Local news caught wind. Then, a few national outlets. One anchor opened their segment with, "From waiter to wordsmith, Marcus Bryant is giving language back to the people." Veronica watched from her penthouse office. She didn't turn the channel. She had donated anonymously to the Bryant Institute twice more since her first gift. Each time, she left no message. And Marcus never reached out. It wasn't about closure anymore. It was about contribution. But deep down, something in Veronica stirred every time his name made headlines. She had built her empire through domination of speech, how to say the right things in the right rooms to the right people. Marcus had bypassed all of that. His power didn't come from decoding financial markets. It came from making ordinary people realize they were extraordinary. Meanwhile, the Institute faced its first real test, a citywide forum on housing reform, where Marcus's students were asked to speak as community representatives. For many, it was the first time they'd ever stood behind a podium. The first time they'd faced an audience with suits in the front row. One student, Rochelle, a single mother and former CNA, was terrified. "What if I mess up?" she asked Marcus before walking on stage. He touched her shoulder gently. "They're expecting Polish. Give them power instead." Rochelle walked up. Her voice shook for the first 30 seconds. Then it steadied. Then it soared. "Every time I've spoken up in the past," she said, "they told me I was emotional. Well, I am emotional, because housing isn't just concrete and rent. It's dignity. And I'm tired of signing lease agreements that make me feel like a guest in my own life." By the end, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The city council passed a rent stabilization motion 3 weeks later. Marcus didn't take credit publicly. But he bought Rochelle a new suit out of pocket. Quietly. No receipt. The Institute started receiving invitations. Nonprofits, schools, even corporate diversity programs wanted him to replicate the model. He refused most. "This isn't something you franchise," he told Lucia. "It's something you live." One evening, after closing up, Lucia turned to Marcus. "You realize, don't you," she tried to own your mind. "Now you're building something even she can't buy." Marcus chuckled. "She offered me a position. But I found purpose." He looked at the now crowded bulletin board, covered in thank you notes, workshop flyers, and quotes from students. Then his eyes fell on one pinned in the center. A typed sentence, unsigned, but printed in a familiar serif font: "You translated more than my invitation. You decoded my ignorance." Veronica's words. No signature needed. That night, Marcus sat down and began writing the next book. It wouldn't be a memoir. It would be a manual. Marcus stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen. The title of his second book hovered at the top of the page: "No One Owns the Language, Dignity, Speech, and the End of Respectability." It wasn't just a follow-up to his first, it was a challenge. To institutions. To gatekeepers. To the idea that there was one correct way to speak, to be heard, to matter. His phone buzzed. An email. Subject, Keynote Invitation, International Cultural Equity Summit, London. He read the body. They wanted him to open the entire conference. No panels, no roundtables, just him. One voice, setting the tone for an audience of global policymakers, educators, and CEOs. He read it twice, then minimized the email and looked around the institute. The walls were now covered with student artwork, visual interpretations of power, speech, justice. The cohort had tripled in size. There were now evening classes, Saturday intensives, even mobile workshops for juvenile centers and local shelters. Lucia was scheduling sessions with high schools, planning partnerships with community colleges. The work was growing outward, upward, unapologetically. Marcus closed his laptop and walked into the largest classroom. The students were mid-discussion, dissecting a televised political debate. "Stop the video right there," Rochelle said from the front. "Did you hear that shift?" He switched from passive to active voice when challenged. "That's strategic deflection." Another student chimed in. He also dropped the contractions to sound more formal. Classic code switch. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, a quiet pride rising in him. Not just because they were right, but because they knew it. Not just because they were decoding the world, but because they were beginning to shape it. After class, Rochelle caught up to him. "You gonna take that London gig?" she asked. Marcus gave a small shrug. "Probably." "You better," she smiled. They need to know what it sounds like when power stops performing and starts telling the truth. That night, Marcus drafted the opening lines of his keynote. Language is not neutral. It is a compass. A weapon. A mask. A bridge. But above all, it is a mirror. The way we react to how someone speaks reveals far more about us than them. As he typed, another email came through. From Veronica. Subject, new project proposal. He hesitated before opening it. 598 side was a concise message. "Marcus, I'm funding a new initiative focused on language equity within corporate spaces. I'd like to collaborate. No figurehead roles. No soft optics. Real strategy. Real impact. You'd lead the curriculum. I'd support it, ***, call it what you want. But I'd rather build something worthwhile with you than watch it from the sidelines, ***, he read it twice. He thought of her voice back in the Crystal Ridge dining room, mocking, dismissive. And then her voice in Zurich was restrained, almost respectful. And now this, concise, measured. Different. People don't always change, Marcus thought. But they can shift. He responded later that evening, "Veronica, we don't need another corporate workshop. We need re-education. If you're ready for that, I'm listening. If not, keep watching, ***. Marcus." He hit send, no hesitation. That weekend, the institute hosted its first public debate. Two teams of students faced off on whether language should ever be standardized in public discourse. The arguments were passionate, insightful, and brilliant. During the Q&A, a man in a tailored suit raised his hand. Corporate type. Do you honestly believe that tone and professionalism aren't necessary in real-world spaces? Marcus stood up from the back. I believe tone is a tool. But professionalism, if used to silence, sanitize, or suppress, is just oppression in a blazer. The crowd roared. Later that night, Marcus returned home and found a package at his door. No return address. Inside was a framed replica of the gold-edged invitation card, the same one Veronica had once mocked him with. Underneath, a handwritten note, "We judge people by their fluency. But fluency is nothing without humility. You taught me that." He placed the card on a shelf, not as a reminder of shame, but of shift. He looked around his home, no awards, no opulence, no symbols of status. Just books, journals, and the slow, steady hum of something permanent being built. Marcus didn't just reclaim his dignity. He redesigned the room it belonged in. And soon, he'd be doing it on a global stage. London was colder than Marcus expected, though the clouds didn't bother him. He walked past black cabs and red brick buildings, the fog curling around the corners of the city like a whispered question. The International Cultural Equity Summit was housed in an old university hall, vaulted ceilings, stone-carved archways, and the kind of lighting that made everything seem grander than it was. Backstage, the event organizer greeted him nervously. "Dr. Bryant, we're honored. The room is a full standing room only. Media's out there too. Just so you know." Marcus nodded calmly. He had no slides. No teleprompter. Just the opening line written inside a worn leather notebook: "What we hear isn't always what's said. Sometimes, it's what we expect to hear. And that difference? That's where injustice lives." He closed the notebook. The room beyond the curtain swelled with hundreds of guests, scholars, CEOs, government ministers, linguists, journalists. Some sipping coffee, some whispering, some just waiting to be impressed. The host walked to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker today is someone who has not only studied language but redefined who is allowed to be its master. Please welcome Dr. Marcus Bryant." The applause began before Marcus appeared. He stepped into the light, not hurried, not stiff. Grounded. His eyes scanned the room and landed momentarily on a familiar face in the fourth row. Veronica. No assistant. No entourage. Just her. Watching. Not smiling. Not frowning. Listening. He adjusted the mic and let the room settle. Then he began. "I grew up believing that if you spoke well, people would listen. That articulation was armor. That fluency equaled safety. Then I learned, it's not what you say. It's whether people believe you have the right to say it." A stillness took over the room. No coughs. No shifting chairs. Just breathless attention. Marcus continued. "For years, I served food to people who spoke to me as if I were invisible. One day, I translated a card written in 3 languages, fluently. The woman who handed it to me assumed I couldn't read it. Her face said everything her words didn't." He paused, deliberately. "That moment didn't give me power. It revealed it." He moved away from the mic slightly, pacing. "Language has always been currency. And like currency, it's hoarded by the powerful and taxed upon the powerless. We tell immigrants they must lose their accent. We call Black English improper. We label passion as aggression. Every time we correct someone's voice without asking their story, we perform a kind of theft." He let that linger. "In my institute, I teach people that their voice is not something to fix. It is something to wield. That they do not need to sound like anyone else to matter. That professionalism is not a tone, it's a truth." Applause. Not all at once, ripples, then waves. He looked down briefly at his notes, then up again. "I was once offered a job, not because I lacked skill, but because I surprised someone with it. That offer came with good money, prestige. But it came wrapped in an apology too soft to be honest." He looked toward Veronica briefly, just for a breath. "I didn't take the job. I chose purpose over position. Because when we accept dignity dressed up as charity, we reinforce the idea that respect must be earned by performance." Now the crowd was with him completely. No shifting. No checking watches. He took one last breath and gave the final words: "No one owns the language. Not the elite. Not the academy. Not the gatekeepers. Language belongs to all of us, and when we reclaim it, we reclaim everything." The silence that followed was holy. Then thunder. A standing ovation, people clapping not just out of respect but recognition. The kind that doesn't fade when the lights dim. After the keynote, Marcus slipped quietly into the hallway, avoiding the rush of admirers. That wasn't his space. He was halfway down the corridor when he heard heels. Darth Bryant. He turned. Veronica stood there, hands clasped, gaze level. Not arrogant. Not performative. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. Marcus nodded. Good. Because I didn't ask for apology. I asked for accountability. She exhaled. You got both. A beat passed between them. Your institute, she said, it's doing more than I ever imagined. If there's ever a way I can support it, quietly, let me know. Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. You already have. You gave me the moment that forced the world to see me. She blinked. Not the way I meant to. No, he said. But exactly how it needed to happen. They stood there a moment longer. Then she turned and walked away, not defeated, but altered. And Marcus? He returned home to find a line around the block outside the Bryant Institute. People waiting. Not to be fixed. To be heard. The line outside the Bryant Institute wrapped around the block, stretching past barber shops, bus stops, and corner stores. It was no longer just locals. Students from other cities, visiting scholars, blue-collar workers, teenagers, and elders, all waited. Not for a celebrity. Not for spectacle. But for access. For voice. Inside, the hall buzzed with anticipation. Today was the one-year anniversary of the Institute's founding. Marcus didn't plan a celebration. He planned a forum. One that wasn't centered around him, but around the students who had taken their voices back. Lucia stood at the front, clipboard in hand, beaming. We've got the city council coming. A few professors from Yale. Even a camera crew from the BBC. Marcus adjusted the mic stand, set out bottled water on the speaker's table. It's their day, he said simply. They speak. We listen. The forum was titled, Language as Liberation, Stories from the Front. No titles. No academic panels. Just the Bryant Institute cohort, each telling the story of how they reclaimed their dignity through the very words others had tried to beat out of them. First was Rochelle. She spoke without notes, wearing her CNA scrubs like armor. When I first came here, I spoke soft. Not because I lacked words, but because the world told me my words were too loud. Now, I speak so my son can hear pride in my tone. Next came Jordan, a 17-year-old dropout turned institute intern. They kicked me out of school for disruptive language. What I was really doing was asking why my teachers only called on students who spoke like they were already middle-aged. Now, I write poetry in two dialects, mine and theirs. Then Malik, a formerly incarcerated father. I used to beg judges for mercy. Now I teach brothers in re-entry how to advocate in the courtroom. You don't need to speak perfectly to demand justice. You need to speak with purpose. The room grew quiet between each speaker, then thunderous, not because of performance, but because of presence. These weren't orators trained to impress. They were truth-tellers trained to own themselves. After the final speaker sat down, Lucia turned to Marcus. You sure you don't want to speak? Marcus shook his head. They already did. But the crowd had other plans. Voices rose from the audience. Bryant. 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 He stepped up, slowly, but not reluctantly. This time, no microphone. Just voice. I opened these doors with nothing but memory, he said. A memory of being underestimated. Of being mocked. Of having someone hand me a challenge, not to test me, but to expose me. He scanned the room, heart steady. I turned that moment into a movement. Not out of pride. But because I knew I wasn't alone. Then he paused, like a conductor letting silence become part of the music. When people ask what we do here, I tell them this: we don't teach people how to speak. We remind them that they always could. They just forgot. Or were told to forget. We're here to remember. The room was still. You want the last word, he said. You already have it. You always did. Applause followed. Standing. Cheering. Weeping. The next morning, national headlines picked up the story: from Trey to Truth, Marcus Bryant's Institute redefines intelligence. The waiter who translated power now teaches others to speak it. No one owns the language, a movement that started with a mockery. Veronica saw the stories. She didn't call. She didn't write. She smiled. Not the smile of triumph, but the smile of someone who finally understood her place, not in front, but behind. Pushing others forward. Marcus, seated at his desk in the quiet hours before sunrise, opened a fresh notebook. Not for another book. Not for a speech. For ideas. Notes. Plans. The Bryant Institute was expanding. Atlanta had reached out. Then Chicago. Then Johannesburg. It wouldn't be franchised. It would be free. Flexible. Rooted in community. Mobile, just like the people who needed it most. Outside, someone knocked at the Institute's door. It wasn't open hours yet, but Marcus walked over anyway. A boy stood there. 12, maybe. Hoodie. Backpack. You teach people how to talk, he asked, nervous. Marcus opened the door wider. No. I show people they already know how. The boy stepped inside. The future followed. And the last word? It didn't belong to Marcus. It belonged to every voice that had ever been told to hush. And now refused. Dear friend, language shouldn't be a barrier, it should be a bridge. Intelligence doesn't wear a name tag or sit in a corner office. It serves, it teaches, it survives. This story reminds us that respect isn't earned through accent or attire, but through truth. Let's break the bias. Let's challenge how we judge worth. If this story touched you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel *** for more powerful true stories that give voice to the unheard. Because the world needs more truth. And sometimes, it starts with listening.